Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. Well, I can't lie to you, ladies and gentlemen, that was not the most exciting slate of games in college football week 4. A lot of blowouts, not many top tier matchups, but we did have yet another profitable week, and we've actually been about as consistent as can be on college football Saturdays to this point. In week 1, we went 12-8, week 2, 12-9-1. Week 3, 15-7 with all of our big bets hitting, and then 12-8-1 on this fine Saturday for a total of 51, 32, and 2 to this point. So make sure you are following me over on Twitter. Daily CFB CBB is the handle, and that is where we post every single one of our picks. So make sure you're locked in with us over there. As always, we'll go through all of this weekend's results, and I'll give you guys my quick thoughts on all of the important games. And we will also look ahead to next week, where week 5 might be the best slate of the entire year. Not much weekday action in week 4, but we did have one game on Thursday night. Rice appears to be showing that they can run the triple option out of the shotgun, essentially the military service offense, but a little bit modernized. And it seems to be working out pretty well for them. They're only throwing for about 70 yards per game, but still a little bit more than those military schools. 3-1 start for Rice. They could possibly be an interesting team in the American. Probably not a contender, but they might beat somebody they're not supposed to. There were 2 games on Friday. Oklahoma State started out the night by losing to in-state school Tulsa as a 9.5 point favorite. They never should have been laying points here, and the Cowboys are an absolute disaster this season. Mike Gundy, I'm guessing, will be out of there at the end of the year. The other game Friday night was a pretty entertaining Big Ten matchup, with Iowa hitting the road to take on Rutgers. This was a pretty low total game, but ended up being a bit of a shootout. 38-28, Iowa wins this one. Not going to lie, though, this felt more like a game that Rutgers gave away. They were 0 for 1 on a critical 4th down and had 1 turnover to Iowa's 0. They also had more penalties. Did have more total yards in the game, but they end up losing the 4th quarter 17-7. So Iowa clutches up when it matters and gets a big road win within the conference. On to the main slate of games on Saturday. There really wasn't one big headliner that I really feel like I have to start with. However, the game that's probably getting the most attention at this point is Clemson. Loses yet again, this time as a 17.5 point favorite at home to Syracuse. This was not a competitive game. Syracuse jumped all over them immediately, 10-0, and really never looked back, winning this one 34-21. Syracuse came into this game with the number 3 passing offense in the nation, and they did exactly that, throwing for 278, but also added 155 on the ground. So Clemson's defense unable to stop really either method of offense for Syracuse there. Expected a big step back for this orange offense after they lost most of the key pieces off of a very good passing attack last year, but it seems like they've just taken new transfers and plugged and played them into the same system. So Fran Brown is still cooking at Syracuse, and Clemson is on a downward spiral that I don't think anybody could have seen coming. Not sure about the future for Dabo Swinney, despite everything that he's done for that program. It might just be time to move on. The other notable game in the noon window to me that probably should be getting more attention than that Clemson game was Memphis pulling off an upset of Arkansas 32-31. Arkansas really controlled this game throughout. They had a 28-10 lead late in the first half, but seemed to become more complacent after that and went away from the run game that was working so well. Memphis took the lead with about 4:50 remaining in the game, and Arkansas actually put together a masterpiece of a drive following that, but fumbled at the 7-yard line when all they really had to do was center the ball and set up for a game-winning field goal. So Memphis gets the ball back, and even after that, Arkansas held them to a 3rd and 8, had a chance to get the ball back. The starting quarterback for Memphis his helmet came off, so he had to go to the sideline. The backup comes in for 3rd and 8, runs the ball, and carries multiple defenders for a first down. This Arkansas team is not showing enough fight to try and keep Sam Pittman's job, especially on the defensive side. Very disappointing to see back-to-back weeks. They could have beaten Ole Miss and Memphis both on the road and literally fumble it away in the fourth quarter both times. So no margin for error either with the schedule for Arkansas. 7 of their 8 remaining games are against ranked teams, and the only other one you could argue Mississippi State deserves to be ranked as well. So Arkansas is going to be going through the blender for the rest of the season. Another upset early in the day that did not surprise me whatsoever was Maryland going into Wisconsin as a 10.5-point underdog. They really controlled this game throughout as well, winning 27-10. Wisconsin just does not have enough offensively right now to be laying that many points against anyone. They did hold the ball for over 40 minutes in a 60-minute football game, but converted just 3 of 17 first downs and were just simply unable to maintain drives throughout the game. Maryland has been playing a very aggressive style of defense this year, and Malik Washington was the only real playmaker on the field for either team in this one. That was the difference. Maryland wins this one easily. The game that was supposed to be the headliner in the noon window was Texas Tech going on the road to Utah. This was promoted by Fox over and over again as what was supposed to be a shootout between two high-flying Big 12 offenses. That always got a bit of a laugh out of me each time I saw that. Utah's offense was anything but high-flying in this one. Devin Dampier attempted 38 passes for just 162 yards and 2 interceptions. Utah really unable to do anything throughout this game. They added a late touchdown to make it look a little bit better, but 34-10, Texas Tech walks in there and really destroys the Utes and makes a statement to the rest of the Big 12. Will Hammond, the backup quarterback for Tech, ended up coming in relief of Baron Morton, who did throw 2 interceptions, but I believe left the game for injury. Hammond looked really solid, and he looked like he provided a bit more in the run game as well. Was very efficient as a passer. Just a freshman, but Texas Tech may have found their new quarterback to add to a very talented roster around him. The Iron Skillet rivalry between SMU and TCU. This game was completely chaotic from start to finish. TCU, I felt like, was dominating throughout, but they just had a lot of breaks go against them in the first half. Ultimately, didn't end up mattering. They win this game 35-24. Kevin Jennings has now thrown 5 interceptions for SMU in their 4 games and has really not looked the same since facing off against Penn State in the playoffs last season. One more notable result for us in the noon window. If you listen to the college football preview that I did over the summer, you'd know that North Texas is one of our favorite teams in the group of 5 leagues. They pull out another overtime win on the road against Army. This is their second overtime win in as many road games that they've faced. They also did that to Western Michigan. Their 2 home games have been blowout wins, so there seems to be a big discrepancy in those results. But North Texas, again, had complete control of this game. They were leading 28-7 before Army put a touchdown on the board with about 30 seconds left before halftime. They also maintained their lead throughout the second half, but after Army scored a touchdown with 2:56 left in the game to cut it to 3, all North Texas had to do was run out the clock, and they forced Army to use all of their timeouts, but then fumbled the ball, giving Army an opportunity to set up for a field goal to send it to overtime. The Mean Green then score and get a stop in that overtime period, so another clutch win for them. Survive and advance is the definition of that win. 4-0 for North Texas. One of the better games of the day was in the 3:30 window. We had a big-time matchup in the Big Ten between Michigan and Nebraska. Nebraska had a real opportunity here to break what is now a 28-game streak of losses to ranked opponents. However, despite this being a close game, it did feel like Michigan had control mostly throughout. They controlled the line of scrimmage in this game, outrushing Nebraska 286 to 43. Bryce Underwood wasn't as explosive as he was against Central Michigan, but still added 61 yards and a touchdown on the ground to go with 105 yards through the air. He was relatively efficient, and his numbers probably would have looked better if not for a handful of big drops. Nebraska's quarterback, Dylan Raiola, did have a very good game running around and making plays in and outside the pocket, but unfortunately was sacked 7 times, and Michigan's defensive line was causing havoc throughout the game. They may have found a new piece in the secondary as well, with true freshman Jaden Sanders standing out and making some very important tackles on the edge. Michigan also got Rod Moore back at safety in this game. He's been injured for over a year. Massive addition to that secondary that has been the weakness of the team so far. Oklahoma and Auburn was really a great defensive battle. Oklahoma set a school record in this game with 10 sacks of their former quarterback, Jackson Arnold, who now plays for Auburn. Incredibly bad beat if you had Auburn in this game, plus 6.5 points. Oklahoma gets a safety on their 10th sack of the game with just 1 minute remaining to win the game by 7 points, 24 to 17. The environment was absolutely crazy for Oklahoma. Got to give a lot of credit there, and their defense as well. As I said, that front seven might be the best in the country. They did struggle to run the ball against Auburn's front as well. I was impressed with how Auburn held up on that side of the ball. John Mateer did not have his most efficient game, but it didn't matter. OU wins and advances. Still pretty high on Auburn long term, though. Most of the other matchups at 3:30 that I expected to be decent games ended up being blowouts. Ole Miss absolutely dominated Tulane from start to finish, 45 to 10. Jake Retzlaff, as soon as I start to praise him, he has his worst game of his career. Didn't turn the ball over still, but only completed 5 of 17 passes for a total of 56 yards. He did not have a completion in the first half. Ole Miss, I guess they wanted to shut me up about their defense regressing this season. They held their own against the run and completely shut down the pass. They seem to have found their quarterback as well. Trinidad Chambliss, a transfer from Ferris State up here in Michigan, one of the better programs in D2, and now he's flourishing in the SEC. Another game where he runs for over 100 yards and throws for 300. Hard to overstate how impressive he has looked so far through 2 games after Austin Simmons started the first 2. Another one I wish I could be spending longer to talk about, but again, was just a blowout from start to finish. UCF just absolutely took care of North Carolina. The Tar Heels just do not have a quarterback and enough pieces on offense to compete right now. UCF did look like they've got some athletes out there, so as much as I've criticized their staff, they might actually have the pieces to be a bit of a sneaky team in the Big 12 this year. Notre Dame bounced back in a big way after starting 0-2 against 2 really difficult opponents. They destroyed in-state rival Purdue 56-30. I will say the defense didn't look great, but I think that actually has more to do with Purdue being a bit of an improved team. It obviously went 1-11 a season ago, but they've seemed to have found a quarterback in Ryan Brown. He has had some turnover issues, but he's also out there making a lot of plays for them. So very interested to see how Purdue looks in Big Ten play. The spoiler makers may be back. They may pull off one of those wins that you're not expecting. A notable G5 result at 3:30 was Western Michigan coming from behind and beating Toledo outright. This was a rough performance by the Rockets. They were up 13-0. Western scored a touchdown, failed on the point after attempt, and then scored again late in the fourth quarter, decided to go for 2 and the win and succeeded. Gutsy call for them, And Toledo now has lost 16 games outright as a favorite over the past 4 seasons. Jason Candle is one like no other. One of my favorite sleeper teams from the preseason, Duke, finally looked a little bit like themselves on Saturday night against NC State, winning 45-33 in what was a pretty exciting shootout between those two teams. Ultimately, Darian Mensah was the better quarterback in this game and just made a few more plays. CJ Bailey continues to struggle when teams get pressure on him, throwing 3 interceptions in this game. He's great when he has time to throw or when he's outside the pocket moving around, but when he's under pressure, it goes south very quickly. So big win for Duke to get on track here. And NC State, I'm still pretty low on for the rest of the season. College Game Day made a pretty poor choice in going down to Miami. I understand that they wanted to spotlight the Hurricanes, as it seems like they are back this year in a big way, but this was not a very competitive matchup against Florida. The Gators pretended to hang around in the game for a while. It was actually 13-7 deep into the fourth quarter before Miami added a couple of late touchdowns. Florida's defense continues to play at a very high level. Unfortunately, DJ Lagway just does not seem to have it at this point. He threw for just 61 yards in this game after throwing 5 interceptions the week prior against LSU. There's a lot of very good pieces on this Florida roster, running backs, receivers, even both sides of the line of scrimmage. But ultimately, if you don't have a good head coach and quarterback, that is going to hold you back in spots like this. So could have been a very nice rivalry game here, but 141 total yards for Florida. They really never threatened. One of the more competitive games on the surface last night was in the SEC between South Carolina and Missouri. It did take a while for Missouri to reclaim the lead and pull away in this one, but they ultimately did, winning 29-20. They really dominated the stat sheet, but I will say that these slow starts continue to be a problem for them. They went down 21-6 in the first quarter against Kansas before ultimately winning by double digits there again. They're going to need to start faster as they continue through SEC play. They do get a little bit of an easier game with UMass coming to town this week, so they should be 5-0, ready to host Alabama off of a bye on October 11th. That's going to be a massive game, but as I said, you got to be able to start faster in that type of matchup. Thought it would be a little bit of a tricky spot for BYU traveling across the country in a true road game against East Carolina, which has a pretty decent home field advantage for a group of 5 school. But BYU defensively so far this season looks elite. They hold the Pirates to just 13 points in this one. They didn't exactly dominate the score sheet, but if you watched the game, it was very clear they were in control. ECU had some fluky things go their way to kind of keep the game more competitive than it really was early on, but BYU pulls away and wins by 3 scores. Their defense certainly appears to be one of the best in the Big 12 so far. There was also a top 20 matchup in the night slate between Illinois and Indiana, and this game could not have been more of a blowout. Indiana wins this one 63-10, just dominated the game in every possible way. 31-9 in total first downs, 579 yards to 161 for Illinois, 312 rushing yards to just 2 for the Illini. As I said after the Duke game, Illinois really got dominated at the line of scrimmage in that matchup. They were very fortunate to win the turnover battle 5-0 against the Blue Devils, but Indiana just flipped the script here. They said, "You're not getting a close game. We're dominating this one from start to finish." They are a real contender once again this year. I've been preaching it. They are essentially the same team as last year, but they added some really nice pieces to their backfield, and they have been running the ball at an elite level so far this year. I expect that to continue, and I also expect Illinois to continue to regress. They've got a really tough turnaround spot now against an underrated USC team coming to town. Speaking of USC, it appears that Lincoln Riley once again has a high-powered offense that he can rely on. USC puts up 45 points last night against Michigan State. They did give up 31, so maybe the defensive improvements have been overblown a little bit, but I actually think Michigan State's offense is just decent. So I'm not going to knock USC too much for that, but the biggest takeaway I had from this game was how well they were able to run the football. 40 times they ran it for 289 yards, which is an average of 7.2 yards per carry. They really just did whatever they wanted to MSU all night long and never felt threatened. So I feel like they're in a great position to do the same thing to Illinois next week and establish themselves as a real contender in the Big Ten this season. Arizona State was one of the teams that I highlighted last week that I upgraded probably more than anyone else. And the Sun Devils did not let me down, going on the road to Baylor and picking up a big close win, 27-24. They kicked the game-winning field goal as time expired. This was a very tight game, and Baylor's offense certainly can play with anyone, but ultimately, Baylor is just too aggressive. I've been mentioning this as often as I can at this point because watching this team stresses anyone out because they are willing to go for it on any type of fourth down. Doesn't matter if it's 4th and 13, it feels like. They will still go for it. They'll still take deep shots, even in short yardage. Sometimes it pays off and sometimes it really backfires. I actually felt like they played a mostly clean game here, but again, one key fourth down they were not able to convert, and Arizona State looked like the better coached and more disciplined team in this game. Always felt like they were in a good position to win throughout, even when Baylor had a one-score lead. Vanderbilt continues to surge, putting up 70 points in what was actually a revenge spot against Georgia State. They lost that game last year, even as good as Vandy was a season ago. They are massively improved on the offensive line, and they have a real identity offensively. Their offensive coordinator is one of the best in the business right now, and they are doing everything right. It seems like they just move the chains up and down the field effortlessly watching them, and it's a really fun offense to watch. They don't ask too much of any one particular player. They just lean on the offensive line and spread the ball around. So they are very in sync right now and are definitely going to be a dangerous team in the SEC all year. The result I am most confused about, and partially this is because, I'll be honest, I did not stay up to watch this game, but Cal, everything was going right for them. They were 3-0. They beat Minnesota and Oregon State, two decent wins. Then they go on the road last night to San Diego State and get shut out 34-0. The freshman quarterback, Sango Politelli, he's been great so far, but only 17 of 38 in this game and 2 interceptions. And obviously the Bears unable to put up any points in this one at all. Really unsure what happened in this one. I got to review the tape at some point, but Cal, obviously a massive red flag for them there. It really seemed like they had a clear path to an ACC title appearance because their schedule is very soft. I guess you could say they were looking ahead past this game, but 34-0, there's got to be some bigger problems there. All right, that's all I've got as far as takeaways go for week 4. Now let's look ahead to the board in week 5, where we've got a ton of massive games, big time matchups all up and down the slate. And it starts on Friday with Florida State traveling to Virginia. The Cavaliers have actually looked fantastic so far. I feel like they got a little unlucky in the loss to North Carolina State. Outside of that, though, they've put up 48 points twice, as well as 55 against William and Mary. Florida State obviously got the big win to start their year against Alabama, and they haven't stopped scoring since, dominating East Texas A&M and Kent State. Those are two pretty terrible teams, though. Virginia, I feel like, is in a position to compete in this game. The line has already dropped from 9.5 down to Virginia +7. I still lean towards the home dog in that game, though. Another big game on Friday night will be in the Big 12 between two teams that appear to be contenders in that league. Arizona State kind of feels like an underdog of a team now at this point after the loss to Mississippi State, so I'm continuing to buy in on them. I think that they beat TCU on Friday night, The line is already moving. Once again, it opened at -1.5 for ASU. It's now 2.5. I would jump on that before it crosses the key number of a field goal at 3. As I said, there's a ton of high profile matchups all up and down the slate on Saturday, but I just want to mention one line that's really sticking out to me in an under the radar ACC game. Duke travels to Syracuse, the Orange, coming off of that big win against Clemson. I think they're going to struggle a little bit to replicate that one, even at home here. Duke has already gotten some major steam on this line from -1.5 in the offseason all the way up to -5.5 now. And it was 3.5 when it was opened on Sunday. So definitely the books agreeing with me there. Duke is still the better team in this matchup, despite the upset that Syracuse was able to pull off. Another road favorite that has already received some major steam is a game we already kind of mentioned in the recap, which is USC traveling to Illinois. The road team is now a 6.5 point favorite. They opened also similar to Duke at -1.5. So USC already getting some major steam there, but as I said, I think they steamroll Illinois very similarly to what Indiana just did. Another banger of a matchup at noon is Notre Dame traveling to Arkansas. As I said earlier, Arkansas has been right there these last 2 weeks. They should have beaten Ole Miss. They should have beaten Memphis. Surely they can't choke another close game here, right? It's going to be hard to trust them, but I still think that they're going to be right there in this game. So if you're giving me 6 points, which is where the line currently is, it was at 7, so it's already creeping towards Arkansas. I think we get a very competitive game here. Notre Dame has not shown much defensively either, so the total has actually moved up a lot in this one as well already, from 58.5 all the way up to 64.5. Neither defense has shown much. Could be a really exciting matchup there. One line that I find absolutely comical is UCF traveling to Kansas State. K-State opened as a 6.5 point favorite here, and I feel like the odds makers have not watched this team play this season. Obviously, they have more raw talent as far as high school recruiting stars go than UCF does, but it's actually closer than you would think in that metric. And UCF has certainly looked like the better team on the field here. I'll be taking the Knights as an underdog regardless of where this line lands, but I think it could end up being much closer towards 3 than 7 by kickoff. Yet another line in the noon window that is standing out to me. I don't understand how Minnesota can be a 5.5 point favorite against Rutgers. I understand that Rutgers just lost at home to Iowa, but they had that game wrapped up and were playing very well. I still believe in their offense, and Minnesota has really struggled on that side of the ball to this point. Definitely looking at the Scarlet Knights as an outright winner there as an underdog. Finally, we move to 3:30, where we've got a couple of big-time SEC matchups. It looks like LSU is going to settle as a short dog on the road against Ole Miss. Ole Miss has looked very impressive, and their biggest weakness is stopping the run, something that LSU doesn't do particularly well. I think this is going to be a big wake-up call for LSU. Their defense has been phenomenal so far this year, but the offense is not quite in sync yet. I'm not sure Garrett Nussmeier is 100% healthy, so I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't play this entire game. LSU may choose to sit him if he gets roughed up a little bit. They've still got plenty of opportunities on their schedule to reestablish that they are a national contender, and I think we'll get a chance to buy low after this game on LSU, expecting Ole Miss to take this particular game, though. Another tough road test for Auburn, back-to-back now. After having to play Oklahoma this week, they go to Texas A&M, where they are once again about a 7 point underdog. A&M obviously has the big win at Notre Dame under their belts. They'll also be off of a bye coming into this game. So lean towards the home side to win this game. Not sure about the spread yet. One game that will probably slip under the radar compared to those two in the same time slot is Washington hosting the number one team in the country, Ohio State. I think this is a very sneaky spot here. Washington did open around 14 in the offseason. I believe they were at least over 10 when this line dropped earlier today. Ohio State, though, I have not been overly impressed with their offense. It was 13-9 late in the second half against Ohio last week before they scored a bunch in garbage time. Only scored 14 points, obviously, in their one real matchup against Texas. Did get the win regardless. But this will be their first game on the road, and it's traveling all the way across the country to face a Washington team that I think is slept on at this point. They are 3-0, but unranked. They haven't really played the toughest of schedules, but the offense is extremely dynamic. Damond Williams can do a lot with his legs in addition to his arm, and Jonah Coleman's one of the best running backs in the country, let alone the Big Ten. I think Washington's going to cause some major problems for Ohio State, and I think they could actually win that game outright. One of the toughest places to play in the entire country. Washington has a great home field advantage. Another Big Ten matchup that has featured a ton of line movement already. Indiana was -3 heading into Iowa, but after that performance against Illinois, it looks like they've already moved all the way up to 7.5. That's going to be tough for me to lay on the road against Iowa, and what is one of the tougher places to play in the Big Ten as well. I think this could be a little bit of a tricky spot for Indiana. I still love them long term, but Iowa's defense, I think, will be able to limit the run much better than Illinois did. Mississippi State gets their second opportunity of the season already to knock off a top 15 team. After beating number 12 Arizona State in week 2, they'll get to face Tennessee this weekend. It looks like they're about a 9.5-point underdog right now. It was 10.5. It is slowly moving their direction. I'm even seeing some 8.5s. Tennessee, it's all about whether they can not turn the ball over. Joey Aguilar had 2 key interceptions in the Georgia loss. They still could have won the game either way, but ultimately I do feel like that cost them at some point, and he had a lot of turnover issues at App State last year. This will be a really tough road environment. Once again, Mississippi State is an underrated team this season. I do think this will be a little bit too tall of a task to pull off outright for the Bulldogs, but they are certainly improved off of a 2-10 season a year ago where they were winless in conference play. All right, this night slate is also loaded. We've got 2 massive matchups. First, Penn State and Oregon in the Big Ten. This is a play I have already locked in on my Twitter. It is Penn State -3. The narrative always has been that Penn State cannot win a big game, and to this point, they have lived up to that under James Franklin. However, this is about as perfect of a spot as you can get for them. Oregon has looked phenomenal so far, but they will be traveling across the country playing their 5th straight game. Penn State will be playing this one at home in a whiteout, and they are off of a bye, so they will be well rested for this game. They really haven't had any difficult competition to this point either. They haven't had to open up the playbook and show anything significant on film, so a ton of huge advantages for Penn State in this game, and they should absolutely win by at least a touchdown. The other big matchup in the night slate is Georgia hosting Alabama. This has really become the biggest rivalry in the SEC over the past decade, even though these two teams are not traditional rivals. Both of these teams historically have focused more on hating Auburn than each other, but because of the success that both teams have had, winning so many national championships between Nick Saban and Alabama and Kirby Smart and Georgia, there's also the added element that Alabama has been owning Georgia. It's the one team that Kirby Smart hasn't been able to beat outside of that one national title game a few seasons ago. Even last year, when Georgia seemed to have a clear advantage in terms of talent, they were not able to win on the road. They got down big early, came all the way back, and then Alabama snatched the lead right back. An absolute heartbreaker for Georgia fans, and one of the games of the year in college football 2024. I'm expecting another game like that in this one. Alabama is just a 3-point underdog in a true road game against Georgia, arguably the most talented roster in the sport. But Alabama still has the players to go toe-to-toe with them. They may be number 17 in the country right now because of their loss to Florida State, but they are showing ever since then that they are still capable of pulling off a game like this. They also come into this one off of a bye. So, again, some advantages for Alabama. I think that they continue the winning streak against Georgia. You'd like to think that Kirby Smart could deal with his Alabama problem in this spot, but I genuinely think that Alabama comes in such an underdog position, plus Georgia being off the big win at Tennessee. I think Bama still has that chip on their shoulder, and they win this game. Another terrible line set by the sportsbooks in the Big 12 is Iowa State being favored by nearly a touchdown against Arizona. Iowa State is currently number 14 in the AP poll, but their schedule becomes less and less impressive every week. The win over Kansas State in Dublin essentially means nothing at this point because of how bad Kansas State has looked. Arkansas State is their latest win, and it's an 8-point win on the road where they really could have lost that game outright. They were trailing in the first half and even into the third quarter. So I still am not buying Iowa State, even though they're 4-0 and number 14 in the AP. I think just like Illinois, they are one of the more overrated teams in the country, and Arizona is one of the more underrated teams. 3-0, and really they dominated that game against Kansas State last Friday. They'll come into this one off of a bye. Both teams will, actually, but I still give a big edge to Arizona. I think they win that game outright. All right, that's been a quick look ahead at the Week 5 board. For full analysis of all of the games, make sure to tune into our Twitter space at 10 a.m. Eastern Time every Saturday. A lot of people have joined us, especially over the past couple of weeks. And as I said at the beginning of this podcast, we've been extremely profitable so far this season. Those plays that I mentioned, though, were only the ones that I post on the timeline. We also give out a bunch of bonus leans and props and everything else on the space. So we've been absolutely crushing it there, me and a few of my co-hosts. All the panelists are giving great insights each week, so be sure to check us out over there. And until then, we will be back here next week for another recap. I hope all of you listening have a great rest of your day.